But why on earth am I going to hold the ERG accountable to retention or even DEI alone accountable to retention? Getting back to what I talked about oversubscribing ERGs and putting them into things that they alone don't control the outcome on, guess where retention is held? People do not quit jobs, they quit managers. I'm not looking for volunteers. I'm creating leadership growth opportunity. Who is not signing up for that if they're interested in growth?
Welcome back to another episode of the ERG Movement Podcast. My name is Maceo Owens, and I go by the ERG Homegirl. All things ERGs on LinkedIn, you'll find me, and I'm excited for our conversation today. Now, this podcast episode is not about me. I love it actually when we're able to bring on some dope guests from all over the ERG space, and today is no exception. So we have Robert with us today. Robert, would love for you to give a quick intro of yourself.
All right. Thanks, Maceo. I'm excited to be on this podcast with you today. My name is Robert Jarvis Jr. I am a DEI strategist at Guidewire Software. We are a company that provides solutions for customers in the property and casualty insurance industry. And I like to say we're kind of like a Salesforce technology for those customers, providing their backend support for their customers. With that being said, I have built a long, I would say long career in the DEI space over the last 10 years, working on, started out helping shape strategic hiring for college strategies, got involved in supplier diversity, later became an ERG leader myself. So I have some experience in that capacity that I'm happy to talk about today. Came over to drive diversity hiring. And then I left that company, joined another company to drive diversity into product development. And now I'm at Guidewire, where my role is more holistically focused on driving diversity in all of those areas across the company, or at least supporting many of them, and also leading our employee resource group program. So that's a little bit about my story.
Okay, I'm excited to dive in because even the way that you worded a lot of what you just mentioned was interesting. And I think some people will need to hear it. Now, just to kick off, even just at the beginning, um, actually, let's start from the very, very beginning. What got you into the space initially?
Into the ERG space or DEI?
DI as a whole.
Yeah. So my childhood was a journey, and the reason why inclusion is so important, right? I was often the new kid. I moved around a lot. Started my elementary school days in Georgia. Ended up doing most of my school in Michigan, where I grew up across different cities in Michigan. And I always felt like, man, it's tough to be the new kid. It's tough to feel like everybody else has something going on that you're not involved with, right? And so for me, every chance I got, I wanted to try to connect people. I felt it was personally important that nobody feel left out. That progressed over the time in my career to where I would start organizations when I was in college that were driving inclusion for folks to feel recognized, welcome, and respected. And I honestly thought that was just a personal passion of mine that was like, hey, Robert, this is like politics and religion. When it comes to work, you kind of leave this by the side, right? This is something you're passionate about, but it's not corporate. But something changed for me. And what changed for me was in my heart of hearts, I'm competitive. I was an athlete. I'm a strategist. I want to win, but I want to win together. And the way I often explain it is I'll say, I want to win like LeBron, not Michael or Kobe, right? I want to win. But I want to have a strong team and I want to make it happen. So for me, what really shifted my perspective on why it needed to go outside of just my personal passion and interest was I was a part of a business case competition at my MBA program. And the way they set this up was they allowed us to build our own teams. They said, you're going to build a team of 6 people. And when you get in your team, we're going to put you in a room. You're going to debate and come up with a solution for this business case, right? So, how did we get there? Well, they asked us, they said, find somebody in this room that's just like you. Okay. Now, for context, I went to a large MBA program, over 100 students, and I think I was one of 2 Black students in the program. There
Mm,
was there were 6 women, and I didn't count to see what everybody else was. That was palpable to me.
yep.
So I found another person like me. It actually wasn't the other Black person in the room. And we were a pair. And then they said, okay, now that you've got your pair, go around and to get to your six, you need to find two more pairs just like you. Super inclusive, right?
That's interesting. That's an interesting prompt. I'm curious. Okay, I'm curious where it goes.
And so after that, it was like, people coming together like lemmings and they ran off and they had their groups. And me and my partner were just looking around this huge ballroom at this facility, like, where's our group?
Right.
And then finally it was just six people in different corners of this big space. And they were like, hey, y'all leftovers, sorry, couldn't find anyone like you. Just get together, get in the room and get on with it. And what happened out of that, right? That loose assembly of folks that was very diverse. We had two women of the six. Um, Nobody else was the same ethnicity or background, lived in different parts of the country. We got into that room and we fought for about 2.5 hours
Mm.
out of the 3 hours we had allotted to come up with our proposal. And when we finally got our proposal on paper, it was like the last minute, literally the last minute. And they came in and they said, what is your proposal for this case? And we gave them our pitch. And they said, did you cheat? And we're like, no, why? They said, well, we've been running this case competition for over 20 plus years. And we've never had a team come up with this solution.
Mm.
And it's the same solution that the real company, major consulting firm, spent months working on. First day, MBA students, diverse backgrounds, ideas were included, had to resolve for the differences of opinion that the folks had, and came up with a novel solution. Because from the onset, it looked like there was one of two ways to go. And every other team picked one of those two ways. When we had our pitch,
Mm.
people were like, whoa, we didn't even know that was an option, basically. And so
Wow.
it cemented for me that this work is critical and important. So
That is such a powerful story. And like the way you started it, I almost thought that there was some intention on why they said pick someone like you. But it's
yeah.
interesting that that's truly like that was, hey, this is how you find your group, is you pick someone like you, which ironically oftentimes is what happens unintentionally.
Mhm.
Um, that you gravitate towards people like you. But wow, that is such an impactful story.
On that piece. So why they did that way?
Yeah, go for it.
Parallel to how we can fall into operating in corporate environments. They wanted us to have a frictionless, kind of connected and engaged experience in the MBA program. So they wanted us to be with people that were like us that we could relate to, so that would be accelerated to get to that point. And
Mm,
think of hiring for cultural fit and
yep.
not realize that we've done that same thing and created kind of an exclusive environment.
That makes a lot of sense, and that draws the connection that was kinda, like, open in my brain in terms of why they would do it, and also the correlation to why people do it nowadays, why we see it sometimes where it's easier to work with people who are thinking the same, who talk the same, versus having to kinda translate for each different person, and even just as someone who doesn't come from the corporate space, I feel like I'm typically that person where it's like, "You're making this difficult because you think differently than we do." Well, that's interesting. Okay, this is already very impactful. So what about the ERG space in particular? How did you become an ERG leader?
So that is another thing, right? So I was invited, just like everybody else. It was an ERG event where they were hosting a session to support Martin Luther King Day. And it was volunteering at a local community gathering to do that. And while I was there, I just started having a conversation with a person who was in a leadership role for the ERG. My previous perspective was, and I'm going to be very transparent and candid, I think people value that, was that people that were leading the ERGs were just trying to self promote, and that's all it was about.
Mm,
And so I wanted nothing to do with that. I'm like, why am I going to sit up here and facilitate your career growth when you're not? And it wasn't about, I don't care about people succeeding, people that look like me or don't look like me succeeding. But it seemed to be that they were, co opting this as an opportunity for that and not really doing things for the community that they're focused on.
Right.
And so when I actually connected with this leader, we were on the same wavelength about what the ERG was for, what it was about. And I was like, I buy into that. I buy into that. And so I signed up. She asked me, she heard a little bit about my background and experience, the things that I've done in the past. And she was like, I need someone to be my co operations manager. Would you be interested? And long story short, she ended up resigning from the ERG about a month later after me saying yes. And myself and another person ended up, oh, I'm not only a member, now I'm the CEO kind of thing where
Mhm.
lead this ERG. And so that's how I really got into it.
What year would you say that was, if you had to guess?
That was around 2017, 2018.
And you were you still an ERG leader around kind of like Black Lives Matter movement?
Definitely.
How was that experience for you?
That was pretty, and I would say I am sure that there are certain people listening that can relate to this, but it was an odd experience to go from you're kind of like carefully leaning in certain areas and trying to pull things across the line and trying to get yourself into positions to have conversations that you want to have. And then all of a sudden, everybody, you're oversubscribed. People want you in this, steering committee to talk about this, and they want to bring you in to share your experience. And
Mm.
it's like, whoa, 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 this is a lot. It was a lot, right? It was a lot for a lot of folks, I'm sure, that were in that space at that time in particular, because you went from this kind of small adjacent areas where you were trying to affect change to now you're like, it's like becoming an overnight star, I would imagine, for somebody that was just on YouTube yesterday. And
Yep.
now, hey, we want you to play at the Grammys. It's like, oh my gosh. So I would say that, but I also was mentally prepared for it because I've always felt that there are inflection points in life for whatever you're trying to drive, whether you're selling a product, you have a vision for it, or a book that you're trying to write, or whatever. There's an inflection point, and you have to stay ready mentally for when that tide might shift
Mm.
and, and be ready for that opportunity. So how I stayed ready for it was just keeping engaged on what are the things that we want to get across the line and what's the best way to take this energy and this focus and help move those things.
See, I wish I had that mindset as an ERG leader during that time. But to be fair, I wasn't really overwhelmed because I was so excited to have this responsibility in a sense. But I still remember getting pinged on Slack on a Sunday night, being in a group chat with the CEO, with all the COO, with all the senior people, and being asked like, "What should we do?" And I'm like, "You're asking me? Like, I'm just Black, but that's it. Like, I don't know if I'm the best person to ask, but leading the Black ERG, naturally, that's where it landed. Curious then, before we move on to the next piece of your story, as an ERG leader, when you kind of became this overnight celebrity and even your ERG essentially blew up, what are some things that you would advise to people as when they're in like this growth phase, essentially, where their ERG might grow super quickly. Or maybe let's just say something else happens in the world where we experience this push to want to be involved. What advice would you give based on that time?
I think really it kind of goes back to two things, and these things don't change no matter what, right? I always know when you're trying to affect change, there will be an opportunity. There will be an inflection point to then take that initiative to where you're trying to go. And I often tell people, whether you're in the ERG space or the DEI space, don't expect and don't carry the weight of the world on your shoulders, right? Martin Luther King, Gandhi, Mother Teresa, you name it. They all had visions for how they wanted to affect change in the world, but they didn't get to go full cycle with it. So why on earth do you think and I say this, I usually put it in me because there's probably some excellent, amazing people out there. I know that humbly, I will say I'm not Martin Luther King. Why would I expect myself to be able to deliver all of that? So what
Mhm.
it comes back to me is really the two principles of begin with the understanding of the breadth of this opportunity. When you are an ERG leader, no matter where you're at in the company, you're likely going to interact in a space where people in your role would not have the opportunity to do so. And you have to be cognizant of that and understand that, hey, I have an opportunity for this moment, whether it's 1 year, 2 years, 6 months, 7 years, whatever, to affect change if I can operate in this space and understand that what I'm trying to deliver, I can do a piece of within this. So that's one piece of it, understanding the full breadth. It's not just a club, it's not just like a passion project. It is truly an opportunity to inject direction into an organization. And then the second point is, and I think I talked about this in an earlier discussion that I had the opportunity to share with you, is you have to be prepared with the mindset to run your ERG like a business because you are working within the construct of a business. And if you're able to think about that in that way, and you have your list of the strategy that you want to deliver, the goals that you're driving towards, how you're building teams, what areas of focus your ERG has to deliver on your product and services, so to speak, for the company and your customers who are the ERG members. If you have that mindset, as those opportunities surface, this senior leader just said they want to sponsor attendance of this conference. I'm ready to go.
Mm-hmm.
Here's how that fits in. Oh, the company's made a policy change and they want to do this and it affects the ERGs in this way. Great. We're already ready for this. And so you're ready mentally before the opportunities come. And you built out your approach to how you would see the world given certain scenarios play out. And if you take those two things in mind, you understand where you really are at in the picture, what the opportunity really is, and you're running your organization like a business, I think you will be able to manage the tide, so to speak, manage the shifting tides.
100%. I have a question to that, but even just to understand where this fits kind of in your journey, when did you become when did you go into like supplier diversity, diversity in product? Were you still an ERG leader as you were doing those things, or was
I
it kind
had
of
not, yeah, I
okay?
had not been. I would say late 2018, early 2019, I started getting involved in the ERG space. And it just so happened that through that experience, it also opened up a door for me to get back into diversity because after I came out of supplier diversity, I went onto a technical team. I was focused on technical program management. I was a technologist in proxy. I was not doing anything related to HR people, etc. I was just trying to help get product out the door and new product at that. And that opportunity presented itself to join the ERG. And I said, this is where my passion lies. Here's how I can affect change. And lo and behold, I ended up becoming extended an opportunity to become a diversity hiring program manager. And so I always think there's only one life we get to live, and there's only so much time, energy, et cetera, that we have to offer. Where is synergy? Where is force multiplication? So I'm in the ERG space. I'm working on diversity. How can I affect change for these communities? Because it wasn't just about my community, but where can I affect change through this role and translate back and forth between the ERG? And I found some awesome opportunities to do that.
That makes sense. Okay, now the timeline is making sense for me, and I see the connection between the two and how it kind of fed into that. Now, with you kind of moving into would you say that ERGs and DEI are one and the same? I didn't want to ask you like that because it feels like a leading question.
Are ERGs and DEI one in the same? I'm going to throw you a wrinkle at you. Here's what I think. ERGs, as I mentioned, I really see them as a business growth, business leadership opportunity. Separate from that, think a lot of the things that you're trying to drive within the realm of DEI are about capturing innovation and really effective leadership behaviors. And I have a good friend of mine that I won't mention his name. I don't want to embarrass him, but I have a good friend of mine that we often talk about leadership principles. And he's not one of those people that I would say is like the most prominent outspoken DEI person. But what he and I agree on, and he's reflected to me, is that if you took a list of all the traits and behaviors that we would classify as effective leadership and the things that he spends his focus and energy on driving leaders toward, it's the same list as what you would see for an inclusive leader.
Mm,
So if you ask me, are DEI and ERG one and the same? If DEI's outcome is to deliver at the end of the day effective leadership and innovation through a company, there's a tight connection to what ERGs are out there to deliver. They're trying to help facilitate and bring the resources and awareness in for how people can get there. So I see them as very much interconnected.
I like that answer. I was just speaking to someone, I can't remember who it was, about the conversation of executive presence. I've heard come up a lot, especially amongst people of color in their performance reviews, saying that they lack it when oftentimes I can't remember who I was speaking to, but they said that they heard someone speak about executive presence and really frame it as, again, those aspects of an inclusive leader.
Mhm.
That made sense versus how executive presence is kind of being weaponized right now just to say traditional corporate professionalism. So yes, that's interesting that you've put it like that. Now with that, you've led diversity initiatives in different pockets. So you mentioned diversity hiring, diversity product, and now you do kind of it all, including ERG programs. Are ERG programs kind of interwoven into all those things, or is there a separation?
I often look to the thought process of like a binary, right? And this gets back to the discussion that we had about how I got involved in seeing how DI makes a connection. All those teams that were in that case competition, it was a binary. It was option A or option B, option A or option B.
Mhm.
And when you look at all of these areas that you can interface in the company, we've pretty much got to streamline that. My leader, Brandy Riggins, I have to give her a lot of credit. The approach to DEI is a perspective of you've got the workforce, you've got the workplace, and you've got the marketplace, right? And so if we're talking supplier diversity, that's marketplace. If we're talking, product, that's marketplace. If you're talking inclusion, business acumen, that's workplace. If you're talking about diversity recruiting, that's workforce. So really, the ERGs can be a partner in all of that and delivering in all of those areas. And what that can look like, of course, ERGs can help support hiring events. The first place I was ever exposed to an ERG, I went to an on-site recruiting visit, and they actually brought their Black ERG to meet with all the job applicants that they had come through their MBA hiring program.
Mm.
Wow, this is great. And when you're talking about workplace, I look at the ERGs as kind of a pulse on the company and what they might need to hear and see based on their lived experiences in the company. So they can help partner and shape the development of content, or at least be a sounding board as in terms of when you're working to develop that for the enterprise. And of course, in the marketplace, that's one of the most exciting areas that I see is because, like I said, I'm a business person. And our ERGs at Guidewire have brought up some novel solutions to, help us engage further for good in the world. We have a partnership with an organization called Thurgood Marshall that we do with a customer called CNA, where we actually challenge students to drive innovation and get involved in competitions and hackathons and things of that nature. So all of those are areas that I think are wide open to an ERG as long as they're thinking through it like a business again, right? If you're only thinking about, I want to get people together, that's workplace, that's great. But there was the workforce aspect and the marketplace aspect that you have opportunity to help with. And if you're just focused on the workplace piece, you're missing the fullness of that opportunity. So that's what I would say.
Now with that, I will say I have some beef with the marketplace one. But I think the way that you framed it made sense. How I'm seeing a lot of companies frame it is one, because they don't approach it like a business. It's more so like they have this pillar of marketplace or commerce or whatever they call it. And they tell ERGs, you need to do something under this pillar with no real structure, no understanding of what that means, and no parameters. Where it almost sounded, and I could correct me if I'm wrong, it sounded like ERGs may have recommended the partnership that you were just speaking about, but they weren't like an end all be all decision maker in it, and much less one who executed on it. But like I said, I could have had that wrong. So let me know.
That's correct. We don't, and I'm a big believer in this. ERGs are part of the solution, but they're not a solution provider, right? We want our ERGs to be put in a place where they can affect the most change and impact and where their perspective is scalable and a force multiplier, not just hands and feet of some initiative or driving some initiative that they really aren't empowered to deliver. They may not be an SME, like you and I both saw during 2020. All of a sudden, you're one black face, but you're the face of Black America in the company. Like that's not a very reasonable expectation to have of an ERG leader. And so I think qualifying it is key in terms of how you want your ERGs to be involved and be insightful, right? Like they need some help. They're going to bring in a perspective on what that community's experience is like and what might be valuable, but you owe it to them to share experience and perspective around the strategy that you're trying to deliver through that initiative, where they can play the best role, and what you're actually going to own within that as you're enlisting them to be a partner. And I think that's the thing where companies that don't do that miss the opportunity, and that's where you see burnout, and that's where you see frustration, and quite frankly, poorly run and executed initiatives when you put people in position that they're not really um, equipped for, I would say.
Mhm.
And I don't mean that, I don't mean that to be offensive, but if you're just XY type of employee, whatever the case might be, and you're not a marketing strategist or you're not a program manager for delivering an event, why on earth would we put you at the forefront of this unless it's a targeted growth opportunity to lead and drive this? So,
Right. That makes sense to me. Yeah. Just even for you to say it again for those who are listening, because I know that we just have to double down on this point. What would be some parameters that you would recommend for like the ERG program that right now has this obscure pillar model and they want their ERGs to affect change, let's just say in the business? What are some of those considerations that they should have, parameters on how to set up their ERG leaders for success?
yeah, so the first parameter I think is critical, and that's governance. And that governance also touches on that, like making sure it's very clear on the roles and expectations you have for the ERGs and how they'll play into if you have those pillars, like I talked about earlier of workplace, workforce, marketplace, that they kind of have a clear understanding of where they might play, what's out of bounds, which I think a lot of ERGs need help with in general, so that they don't get into trouble. And now they're sitting there with their manager talking to them, and it was something they're doing in a volunteer role, right? Like that's the worst case scenario. But you have clear governance on where they can play a role, what's expected of them. And then I want to double down on saying you need to ensure that there's top level support, because top level support can also help and drive accountability for, okay, we said we're going to do this. We said we're going to partner with this community. I'm forefront of it. I'm pointing for it. Here's what I need to see. And I think that helps. It's a two-way thing. It helps the ERGs, as I like to say, come correct, because they start to rise to the level of expectation around what they're doing. It gets support from their management team. And overall, it makes a better experience. And then the last thing I think, after you get the governance, you get the support, make it easy. As a program manager for ERG programs, take the red tape out of the way that is not necessary. Be an enabling partner, not an enabling constraint.
Mm. Is it whose responsibility is it, in your opinion, to make the ERG program easier and create the governance?
Yeah, the ERG program manager, without a doubt, right? And the level of leadership for that is something that is not for the faint of heart, because you have to be there for these people as well, because they will make mistakes, but you have to let them know that you're in it for them to win. And you have to be constantly on the search for, what knowledge and insight can I bring in that can make this easier? Because I see where you're at. I know you're only here for a period of time. And at the end of the day, I want this to be sustainable, because there could be a person like me, right? I didn't say this earlier, but when that ERG leader said, "Hey, do you want to step up?" I was thinking, probably not, because I'm thinking of leaving this company.
Mm.
How many people are like that? And if I would have left the company, I wouldn't have been able to deliver what I delivered in my time, which has affected other people's lives to this day. And so that's why I think it's so important for ERG program managers to understand. I talked about ERG leaders understanding the magnitude of their opportunity, but ERG program managers also need to understand and comprehend. You're not just running a series of passionate employee groups and volunteers. You are touching probably between 20 maybe up to 50, maybe even 70% of the company in a unique way that no one else at the company does. And so you own that. You own making it easy and also having the governance in place. And that's, you're skating down an interesting line there, but you want to make it easy and you want to make it right. It's governance piece. And so making it easy helps people sustain their engagement because it is side of desk for a lot of people. It is voluntary. And just like if you were holding a volunteer event, what would you do? You would lay it all out, you make expectations clear, and you give people the resources they need so that they can come in and make it light work. So,
Makes so much sense. Now, you mentioned executive support. Um, I've noticed, just speaking with people from different companies, more and more is becoming evident that some companies just don't care, if we're being honest. Some companies, even with them having their ERG program in existence, they don't actually truly care about making change. They don't care about just anything that has to do with what ERGs might be passionate about. What would kind of be your advice to someone who's realizing that their company doesn't actually care?
yeah, I think to answer that, it's a partnership between the DEI office and the ERG program in itself, right? People don't care. Why don't they care? They have competing areas of focus. I don't think many people that you talk to, unless they're totally against DEI, don't truly care. And I think even the people that they think they're truly against DEI, that's why I like to shift the discussion and
Mhm,
say DEI is a proxy for these two business outcomes, which are critical to you. That's making sure that you have effective leaders and driving innovation. We
mhm.
don't disagree on that. So if I find that there's waning interest or waning engagement or whatever the case might be, the challenge is to tell the right story and to paint the right vision because that vision creates the value. If you're able to connect that back to what's important to those people. And you have to think through like just like, I like one rule I've always heard is the 7x7 or 33-30. Those are two rules that I learned early in my career, and I believe in them a lot. So 7x7 means 7 times 7 ways, and it's a communication process
Mhm.
of figuring out you got to tell somebody something 7 times 7 different ways so that it sticks. And that's the same thing with that story that you're trying to tell. And you come up with different ways to have compelling content. And I like to say this to my ERG leaders a lot when they're planning events. Events are sometimes a default to how we think to engage, but they're not the only way to engage. But if you do have an event and you do want people to come, keep my voice in mind. There is a lot of money on the line. Whether that event was a $500 event, a free event, or a $50,000 event, you've got an hour, 30 minutes of time that people are getting paid to be a part of this. So that content has to be on point. It has to be relevant and meaningful. And you should be listening to your folks about what it should be. So don't go and make something for somebody and hope they come to it. Make something for people that you've heard from them about. And as you create that compelling content and you have that great story around what you're doing and why and how it's driving change and where you're trying to go, that's where you get those people to say, you know what? I was going to go do that, but I'm going to do this instead.
That is huge. Free has a cost. Even something that we think is free, it still has a cost. Even like you said, just the time of getting people on a call at the same time, it should be worth it. Um, where I think a lot of times because ERG leaders default to events, they figure we can just do no agenda, let's just come together and just vibe out. And where sometimes like you really have to make it worth people's while. And then you can't be upset that people don't engage when you don't. So that's part of it. I also like how you mentioned those two things and really telling the right story because I have never heard anyone put it like that, where I like that. Where granted, it is a responsibility of the DI team to tell this right story to set up the ERG program for success. But even let's say hypothetically for companies without a DEI team even and just who have nowhere to start, you mentioning that it helps uh, around effective leadership and driving innovation. I think more people could lean on those two things. I almost thought for sure you were going to say retention. And I almost thought for sure that's what you were going to say. Which I have thoughts, but is there a reason why you didn't?
Yeah, I'll tell you this because the realities of the situation, right? There are, even with layoffs, it is a very competitive job market. There is, especially when we're talking about the ERG communities, there's a lot of people looking for people out of these communities and the skills, resources, et cetera, that they have to offer. Some companies do get it and are focused on DEI. And the reality of it is, I cannot charge an ERG alone with retention because guess where retention is held? And this gets back to why I said effective leadership.
Mm-hmm.
Is effective leadership in the company is where retention is held. People do not quit jobs, they quit managers.
Mm.
And so it's so important from my perspective, if I throw a great party and everybody loves it, they feel connected, they're still going to boohoo to me about their manager and say, I'm out.
Yep. Yep.
The ERG has nothing to do with driving a change in that perspective. We can at scale impact and help people understand across lines of differences and things of that nature. But why on earth am I going to hold the ERG accountable to retention or even DEI alone accountable to retention? Now, I think there's a role we play. Don't get me wrong. There's definitely a role, especially in the DEI space, that we play. But
Mm-hmm.
getting back to what I talked about, oversubscribing ERGs and putting them into things that they alone don't control the outcome on, I think it's hard to say you own retention ERG. You play a role in helping, right? You can be a solution provider a solution partner, but you're not the solution provider. Like I can't look at the ERG and say, why did all XYZ type of employees leave the company? It's because you are not doing enough events, you're not creating enough value, et cetera. No, it's about leadership. It comes down to leadership and relationship with the employee that really drives that. DEI needs to help support effectiveness and partnership on helping leaders understand that. ERGs play a role in painting the picture for why things could be amiss. But again, that's why I don't put it as the primary area.
Okay. I wasn't going to go this direction, but I have questions. And I agree. I like the way that you put it. But even just to make it clear, even in my brain, when talking about this, for effective leadership, how would you tie ERGs to being able to kind of drive effective leadership?
So, effective leadership, number one, in the ERG, you kind of have an incubator program for leaders who are challenged with influencing without authority, listening, working across lines of difference. Because in an ERG space, it becomes very palpable. Hey, that ERG is doing this ERG is doing that. What can we do? And you have to work sometimes intersectionally across people who have their own initiatives. So those are all behaviors that influence more inclusive leadership behaviors. You're learning about things from other people in the ERG community because you often partner and support their efforts as well. Those are things that you're not often taught. Like how many times you hear a business leader in a line of business, maybe not you, Micio, but hypothetically say, hey, you know what? That team over there is having this big, problem and agenda that they want people to be a part of. Can you come and support? No, no. That's my head count. I want my head count. I want my scope. I want the impact that we're trying to deliver. They over there have their own and there's some aspects of teamwork, right? But it's different in the ERG space because there's a vested interest in lifting many boats in the ERG space that's more clear and palpable than folks that may have a more corporate mindset where it's, what am I held accountable to? Am I delivering them out? Right.
Okay.
So those types of things I think are, like I said, I look at the ERGs as a leadership incubator. And those are areas of opportunity that ERGs can help people be more effective leaders and also be a hub for developing more effective leaders in that way.
So if you're trying to talk to an executive and tell them this is how ERGs benefit members, not even factoring in how it can benefit the ERG leaders, what would you say?
If I were to say how ERGs can benefit members, like why am I asking your folks for their time?
Yeah.
I would say one of the ways our ERGs are structured, I'm just saying what we like to see happen is we're going to create community. We're going to give you an opportunity to grow your career in some capacity by being a part of the leadership team. And we're going to give you professional development opportunities as
Gotcha.
part of our regular content. So we build community and we develop leaders. That's my take on it. When you're asking for that leader's time to have your people be involved in just as a member, right? And those things can lead to more engagement. They can lead to better retention because, again, if I'm developing you and I'm giving you resources and things that you don't have, that may be beneficial to you sticking around. But still,
It's
I
not
like
ending.
John Maxwell. Everything rises and falls on leadership. And so we play a role in helping create the leadership environment necessary to retain folks, but we don't own retention. To me, managers, leaders own retention at the company,
Yep.
and we partner to facilitate that.
I think that that is super powerful. And even for the other part around innovation, that goes back to what we talked about earlier around that marketplace piece and really setting up the leads for success. So that also makes sense. I will just say I've seen some examples of how ERG leaders have not been set up for success around marketplace. And I think that's why I have such a beef with it. Because when it's not done well, it is so damaging for the ERG leader, sometimes even for the company, where the company might lose money because the ERG leader overdid something where maybe the company wasn't there. So
Mhm.
your take on how to approach that part of
Yeah.
innovation.
When it comes to innovation, it really comes down to two things, right? And there's a very interesting study that Boston Consulting Group did. I recommend everybody take a look at it, especially if you're a DI person, because you need to be able to understand the language of business that moves this lever in this way when we talk about innovation. What they said was essentially, we want to look at the role that diversity in leadership teams plays towards innovation, because we said there's a business case here. Well, what they found was that when you looked at companies across the world that they surveyed, and I'll send a link to you, ACO, you can look at the leadership team and the companies that have above average diversity, they have significantly more of their revenue coming from innovation. And how did they define innovation? I think it was like close to 20% more annual revenue was coming from innovation versus companies that have below average diversity in their leadership team. And they measured innovation very simply. They said, we're not going to get into all these semantics around what this philosophically is. We're going to take a more financial outlook on it. And what we're going to say here is innovation is simply this: it is new products and services launched in the last 3 years. So, those new products and services that were launched in the last 3 years, how much of your current revenue comes from those products and services? And that's where they looked at, and that's where they found it. And so the role ERGs play in driving innovation is a second order effect, right? Is they're facilitating an environment where people can know how to make sure that others feel seen and heard. They are partnering to help increase the representation and leadership, as well as within the company, of people with different perspectives and different worldviews and different thoughts that may shape a different outcome, similar to what we saw in our case competition. So that's kind of how I look at it from an innovation perspective.
I like that. Okay. And I know we're really over time, but I have a question. Just because we didn't really get to touch too much on um you as a program manager of an ERG program. Give us one major learning and one major win as an ERG program manager that you think other ERG program managers should know.
One learning and one win.
I don't
Okay.
like to say loss, but one hard lesson.
Yeah.
Uh,
So I think I've been an experienced program manager in the DI space, as well as being an experienced ERG leader. I would say an important thing if you're stepping into the role as ERG program manager is be open to listening and understand that what you see in front of you may not be face value, right? So don't take it at face value. Inspect deeper and really believe in your people. And I would say that's not really an L, but coming to a company of different size and working with different people, their view on what this looks like is different. So you have to merge, especially when you're leading people, you have to merge where you're trying to go with where people are at. And I would say if you've never been involved in ERG space, understand a few things about your ERG leaders. They are going to need your support in ways that you may not have been experienced with. They're going to get themselves into trouble they were not expecting, because a lot of times ERG leaders are operating at a different capacity in the company. They don't know about all the politics and all these things. So you need to be prepared to support them, lift them up while holding that governance into account. And I would say that's an important thing. Um, and then what would I say really works? What really works to me, it gets back to what I talked about with leadership. You have to embody those inclusive leadership behaviors, not just teach others those. You have to embody those in how you lead your ERG program. Because
Mhm.
again, your North Star is your North Star until you have shared, got that vision bought into by everyone that's in the program. Your program is going to be subject to change or ambiguity or challenges because you have to get everybody moving in that direction. And so, what that comes down to is again, inviting people to solution space and also being able to say, you know what, that's my North Star. And I always like to say this, I'm flexible about the how we get there. I'm flexible. I'm not flexible about the why we're going there.
Mm.
And I think as you open yourself up more to that, I've found a lot of success opening myself up to that concept of, hey, where I'm trying to go is there. You could go down A Street and B Street, and that's the direct route that you see it. But these people see C, D, and E Street are better ways to get there. Does it really matter?
That's so important. And even for me, which I can definitely classify myself occasionally as a control freak, where I feel like if this is the way I said it, we have to go this way. And I think that ironically, being at least adjacent, if not in the diversity space, you have to be open to different trains of thought. And I'm saying this out loud, even like telling this to myself, because I'm thinking about some specific situations where an ERG leader might have been like, I don't think this is the best way. And I'm just like, oh well, essentially. And yeah, even then, I that is such an important part around encouraging diversity of thought and being open to hearing feedback. That's always fun when you have to hear a lesson for yourself. But that's how you learn essentially. Okay. Now, like I said, I know we're over time, but the way I like to close all the podcasts is really with this being the ERG Movement podcast. The concept is trying to do things better within the ERG space. Um, what's something that you feel like people in the ERG space need to hear in order to really take ERGs up a notch?
I would say, and I might have said this earlier, but treat it like a business. Do not disrespect the work. It is different work. It does fall in the people side of the equation, but we all know that's the hardest side of the equation. So you have to operationalize it in that way, I think, to make the biggest impact. And that's really understanding where your customers are, your stakeholders. Your customers, of course, the people that could be a part of the ERG community. Your stakeholders are all those other people in the corporation in some capacity. And you need to make sure that you're able to drive value creation for all of those folks because that's what sustains your program. That's what sustains engagement. And at the end of the day, if you have that mindset of, running it like a business, you're developing leaders. I'm not looking for volunteers. I'm creating leadership growth opportunities.
Mm.
Who is not signing up for that if they're interested in growth? So you're building an operation and you're honing your leadership skills because at the end of the day, most people that run an ERG would like to be a leader in the business someday, I would think. Otherwise, they probably wouldn't have stepped up for leadership. So hone and develop those skills as you're building your business operation. And that's what I would say. That's how you take your program forward. Your program is going to be challenged the further away it is from delivering on that value and being able to convince stakeholders and memberships that this is something valuable that they should take part in and support.
That was such a strong close. Let everyone know, how can they connect with you?
Yeah, if you want to, please reach out to me on LinkedIn, Robert Jarvis Jr. at Guidewire Software. Happy to connect. Always happy to share thoughts and hear thoughts from others because this is not something that has the same answer tomorrow as it did today. And we can always learn on our journey. So happy to wrap with you. Happy to talk to you, however you prefer. And Maceo, thank you again for this opportunity to speak.
Thank you for joining, and I'll catch you all on the next